what you're seeing here is sort of what we saw over the course of the past year was sort of Wall Street warming up to Bitcoin. And what we're seeing, it's just another extension of the establishment cozying up to Bitcoin, I guess.
The corporate cabal, the gatekeepers of America's wealth, are now digging their mangy claws into Bitcoin. And it is an extremely alarming situation for everyone involved. Why is that?
Larry Fink's about face and all of that as sort of the private sector establishment turnaround, and this is sort of the public sector establishment turnaround. But as far as it relates to financial freedom, I don't think the policies expressed by Trump, or at least what Trump expressed or hinted at in his speech, because he didn't, as far as RFKs went, he was more deliberate about what his policies specific, and Trump was a little more vague. But based on what Trump said, talking about sort of yoking Bitcoin and the dollar together and using that to expand the dollar's power and hegemony globally, and then also bringing in stable coins, which of course would be in this case dollar denominated stable coins into the play. We have to consider what that means if the reason we're voting for it is to ensure that Bitcoin will be used to propagate financial freedom globally.
For starters, BlackRock, the massive investment company, bought more Bitcoin this week than any ETF sold in the last 3. That's wild, right? If we take a look, you'll notice BlackRock's name popping up all over the place. This is classic BlackRock behavior. We've been warning everyone about this for a while now. If we go back to the summer of 2023, we saw how BlackRock would become one of the largest holders of Bitcoin, and guess what? They're already on their way. At this rate, they might end up holding over 10%, maybe even 20% of all Bitcoin. Honestly, who knows how high their share could climb? BlackRock could end up being the primary custodian of Bitcoin in the future. It sounds crazy now, but when you consider how much they're buying and already holding, it's not far-fetched.
Stablecoin issuers that are prominent, like Circle, openly talk about the programmability aspects of their stablecoin. And, they're in a very deep alliance with BlackRock, Circle particularly, and Tether itself has made an alliance with the FBI and the Secret Service and, other aspects of the U.S. government to freeze wallets at the behest of the U.S. government, thereby making Tether sort of a soft extension of U.S. foreign and fiscal policy abroad as it relates to sanctions and other things. Some of which the U.S., of course, in the past has used to facilitate regime change operations and other things, not necessarily stop terrorism, as they are inclined to say. So it's important to keep that in mind. And, if you're allowing intelligence agencies, what the FBI technically is, to be onboarded onto your stablecoin, it's really not a private sector thing. It's a public-private partnership. And public-private partnership is the model that the U.S. and really most of the world essentially.
Just to give you a sense of scale, BlackRock has bought almost 360,000 Bitcoin since January 2024. That's over $23 billion worth in about 9 months. And it all started right after their ETF got approved on January 10th and began trading on January 11th. Right now, BlackRock holds more than 2% of Bitcoin. And alongside Fidelity, they've already done $1.87 billion in combined trading volume just today. Everyone's calling this bullish news, and in the short term, we'll see Bitcoin rise. But here's the catch. This is the last cycle where you can make big money off the wild, volatile crypto moves. After this, we're moving toward the institutionalization of crypto. And with that comes regulation. Once that happens, the exchanges and the decentralized market we're used to will be a thing of the past. The big players, BlackRock, JP Morgan, Fidelity, and Wall Street, will have their grip on crypto so tight that it'll no longer be about decentralization. And it's all starting with Bitcoin. We've already seen the first signs of this institutional takeover. BlackRock alone controls about 2% of the total Bitcoin supply, which is a huge deal. Sure, some people are cheering for BlackRock, thinking it's good for their investment. But think about it. BlackRock already controls a massive part of the global economy. They're not the good guys, no matter how much they try to spin it. BlackRock and MicroStrategy currently own about 3% of the total Bitcoin supply, with that share being valued at around $40.8 billion. The question is it good for the crypto community that 2 major entities hold such a large portion of Bitcoin? The answer is no. It leads to monopolies and unparalleled control over the country's money.
That were essentially before there was a financial crisis related to COVID. In late 2019, BlackRock created this plan that pitched to the central bankers at the Jackson Hole meeting in 2019 about going direct. And basically the idea was, during the next crisis, let's QE again, but instead of giving the QE money to public entities, let's give it straight to the private banks. That's essentially what happened. And one of the people that received those funds, those emergency funds that were meant for Main Street, was BlackRock, and they used it to buy shares in their own ETFs instead of bailing out the people whose whose businesses were forced to close as part of government policy. And so really, this is one of the key reasons why you saw an unprecedented wealth transfer happen during COVID. And this plan wasn't implemented as soon as COVID started. They actually started when the repo market started to go haywire at the end of 2019 and used COVID as the excuse to ramp it up.
BlackRock's role in Bitcoin is only going to increase. Their Bitcoin ETF is still rising, and they're likely to increase their purchases. Meanwhile, MicroStrategy is adding more Bitcoins to its shares. With these two companies upping the antes, that 3% could surge into 5%, 10%, even more in a span of a couple of years, making open the possibility that these big players could eventually end up owning a huge chunk of the Bitcoin market. Looking specifically to MicroStrategy, it's interesting to note that BlackRock is one of the company's top 3 shareholders. That not only means they hold Bitcoin directly, but they also have great influence over MicroStrategy, which holds very large sums of Bitcoin itself. In the broadest sense, BlackRock's exposure to Bitcoin is growing on multiple fronts. This gives BlackRock considerable control over Bitcoin, and this level of influence is likely to keep expanding. This is something Whitney has talked about before.
So, Larry Fink's involvement in that, and also his involvement in the 2008 financial crisis, for example, these same people at Wall Street, when there's a crisis, affect these massive wealth transfers that take, money from regular Americans to the very top, who are now richer than ever, especially after COVID. And, regardless of who wins in November, when this debt crisis comes home to roost, that's what's going to happen. And I think they're going to use that as well to saddle the American people with surveillable, programmable money. Maybe it's more likely if Kamala gets in, it'll be a CBDC. But it seems quite clear that if Trump gets in, it will be a private bank digital currency, or some of these private bank issued stable coins or tokenized deposits and things like that, which again are just as surveillable and programmable as stable coins. And maybe it will be framed as a win, but a win for what, really? Again, I'm not super optimistic about that. But again, my view is that the government is essentially run by, organized crime and intelligence agencies that have fused what they do, and it's been very profitable for them.
But it's not just BlackRock and MicroStrategy. Many other institutions, including governments, are becoming tied to Bitcoin. There's a broader concern that elites are positioning themselves to control much of the financial markets, including cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. This could involve dominating the infrastructure that supports Bitcoin, such as energy, chips, and internet service providers, ISPs. In fact, much of the infrastructure behind Bitcoin is already under the control of large institutions. This is something worth considering when looking at Bitcoin's future. Now let's talk about the Lightning Network, which facilitates fast Bitcoin transactions. Lightning Labs, the company behind the Lightning Network, is partnered with the World Economic Forum, WEF. Bitcoin maximalists, who are proponents of a fully decentralized Bitcoin, might find this concerning because the WEF's involvement represents the interests of major global institutions. The irony here is that Bitcoin maximalists often oppose programmable financial technologies. Yet the Lightning Network, which they support, is actually backed by the WEF and is building a programmable financial layer for the internet. This partnership with the WEF suggests that Bitcoin is more deeply integrated into the global financial system than some may realize.
They're going to continue to do that and pull the strings of both parties. And when there's a crisis, this is invariably what happens. And there's plenty of historical precedents to look at as far as, the economics of it are concerned.
Yeah, well, the wealth concentration you highlighted, I feel like that's one of the things that ultimately, thankfully, led me to Bitcoin because I was getting so frustrated and disillusioned, and I didn't know who to blame. And it was when I started to peer into how the financial system actually worked that I was like, oh, this is the root problem. It's politics and the polarization are all symptoms that are coming from it, but at the root of it, really just manipulated money, broken incentives, and corruption at the core. So
Hmm.
I felt a lot of hope in Bitcoin, and I want to tug on something that you said because one thing that I'm trying to do actually as well, and I see some of the other public figures in Bitcoin doing this, is when you go full force combating, maybe the people in power or powerful corporations, you don't get very far, right? And so I think of a quote from the 80s, Frederick Hayek, the economist who didn't, Bitcoin wasn't around, but he said something about like, the only way that we're going to fix the problem of government and money is if we introduce something in a sly and roundabout way that they pretty much cannot stop.
It really challenges the idea that Bitcoin remains entirely outside the influence of major institutions. Despite claims from Bitcoin maximalists that Bitcoin represents financial freedom, large organizations like the WEF are clearly involved in its ecosystem. The bigger picture is that Bitcoin is not just being used as a decentralized asset. Governments and large institutions are utilizing it for their own purposes. For example, the US government has used cryptocurrencies to bypass state-controlled banking systems in countries like Venezuela. In 2020, the US State Department partnered with Circle, the company behind USDC, the sixth largest cryptocurrency by market cap, to evade Venezuela's banking system. This allowed them to financially support opposition groups in Venezuela while avoiding the state's financial controls. Similarly, in Ukraine, the government has adopted a digital ID system called DIA, which is essentially a government in a smartphone. This system tracks all payments digitally, showing how Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are becoming tools for governments to exert control in new ways. Whitney Webb doesn't think it's looking good for America because it largely depends on what regulations the elite put in place.
Well, I think it depends on what happens with regulation and moving forward ultimately. I think it's been made very clear by the people that like it in the traditional financial system now that they only like it if it's used as digital gold and not as something transactable. They don't want to transact with it. They want it to be something that's held and again is for asset storage, really. And that it's a digital asset, that it's never a digital currency. And I think, we would be naive to underestimate them. Maybe they're acting like they're on, the team of regular Bitcoiners right now, but I definitely don't think that's true. I think there's going to be a lot of efforts to centralize it as much as it can be and control the on and off ramps as much as possible. And, potentially make efforts to criminalize efforts to put privacy on Bitcoin. And I don't know. I mean, it honestly depends with a lot of the decisions that are made going forward.
The US government recently secured $15 billion in aid for Ukraine, with Samantha Power, the head of USAID, playing a key role in getting this money through Congress. A major concern was that Ukraine, historically known for corruption, might mismanage the funds. If the money was given directly to the Ukrainian government, there was no guarantee it wouldn't end up in the hands of corrupt officials or warlords. To address this, Power pitched the idea of using a new digital payment system that could track every dollar distributed. This system was marketed as an anti-corruption tool, ensuring that aid payments were directed to healthcare workers and pensioners rather than corrupt intermediaries. However, it also gives the US government the ability to monitor every transaction within Ukraine's economy. While this system isn't based on Bitcoin, it operates similarly and is even compatible with Bitcoin, raising concerns about surveillance and control. The concept here is what some critics refer to as a Bitcoin prison. The very technology that was supposed to promote financial freedom is now being used as a tool for increased government oversight. This concern extends to how Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies can be tracked. While many believe they can hide behind anonymous wallet addresses, the reality is that transactions on the blockchain are transparent and easily traceable. This raises questions about claims from Bitcoin advocates, or maximalists, who argue that Bitcoin is free from government manipulation. Despite their belief that Bitcoin is independent of state control, large institutions like BlackRock are buying significant amounts of Bitcoin. Some maximalists celebrate this, thinking it will drive up the price, but they fail to realize that it increases institutional control over the cryptocurrency.
And be able to challenge some of these efforts to centralize it and surveil it, then efforts need to be, you need to be very proactive about making that a reality.
No, that's
and pushing back against it. And I think an important time to do that is now, before there are regulations, before the system is in place, the system that the establishment would like to put in place, and the place it wants Bitcoin to hold, in their system. Obviously, that's going to be a system that benefits them a lot more than it benefits the rest of us. It's important to keep in mind that people like Larry Fink have very overtly said that markets don't like democracies. They like totalitarian governments. So this is a guy that is not about promoting your financial freedom or anyone's financial freedom. This is someone that likes top-down centralized control to reduce risk in markets in which he trades and is active, so he can, make more profit for his shareholders, which are, multi-billionaires and other people like that. So, and of course, Fink's in that category as well. So, to trust these people, I think would be very naive. And I think, maybe there is hope of some sort of Trojan horse functionality there at some point later on, but not if people aren't thinking about that the whole time and thinking about how they'll affect those changes.
At the same time, there's a connection to USDC, USD coin, which is backed by Circle and heavily funded by BlackRock. USDC is another digital currency that operates within this framework of state control, where transactions can be tracked and monitored, which puts into perspective the growing influence of major institutions in the world of cryptocurrency. BlackRock has been rapidly accumulating Bitcoin, and it's projected that they could eventually control the majority of it. Just in the last 9 months, BlackRock has acquired about 360,000 Bitcoins. If they continue at this pace, especially with market downturns potentially offering cheaper Bitcoin, their holdings will increase significantly over the next year or two. This is important because as more institutions like BlackRock and others enter the Bitcoin space, the market will change drastically. In the coming years, we're likely to see more regulations and the market becoming increasingly institutionalized. This could challenge the narrative pushed by Bitcoin maximalists, those who argue that Bitcoin is a decentralized digital gold and a store of value that is separate from traditional financial systems. Critics argue that once institutions dominate Bitcoin, it won't serve as the escape from traditional systems that many early adopters envisioned. Instead, it could become a centralized form of decentralized finance, which goes against what Bitcoin was supposedly designed to achieve. The reality, according to some, is that Bitcoin may never have been intended to be fully independent of government or institutional control.
All the stuff that you said about data and we basically did freely put it out there, and now they're using it against us. And you talked in your last piece about how data is pretty much the most liquid commodity and they can weaponize it. And it's so crazy because now all that information's already out there. How do you even remove yourself? And you're right. It's like, no matter who you vote in, you could get really passionate about politics. And I loved what Edward Snowden said at the conference. It's like, vote, but don't join a cult. But like, literally, how do you fix all of this?
Well, something like Palantir is a really good example of how bipartisan that is. Every administration that's in office, whether it's Democrat or Republican, gives them more and more and more and more and more contracts, and a lot of these other companies that are sort of in the universe of Palantir, like Anduril and Clearview AI, the same is true there as well. So, again, these are policies that are going to expand regardless of who's in power.
As institutions like BlackRock and Fidelity take on more Bitcoin, it raises questions about what Bitcoin enthusiasts are really hoping for. If the goal is for more institutional involvement, they may not realize how much the original vision of Bitcoin could change as these entities gain more control. Even recently, Bitcoin prices have exhibited a very significant correlation with an 8-year growth of the balance sheet of the People's Bank of China. The People's Bank of China has kept up with a notable positive 30-day correlation. It holds approximately $6.2 trillion in US dollars on its balance sheet today. As much as 0.66 correlation coefficient exists between the price of Bitcoin and the size of the PBOC balance sheet, showing a tight relationship. Although it remained largely positive over time, there have been two short bursts during 2016 and then from late 2022 to 2023. On the other hand, Bitcoin's correlation with the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve for 30 days has dropped to 0.88, the lowest since 2016. A correlation coefficient that falls within the ranges of 0.6 through 0.9 is deemed strong, and 0.8 to 1 indicates a very strong correlation. These correlations do enable analysts to clearly understand relationships between asset prices and other economic variables. The interesting part is the positive correlation with PBOC, since the bank recently announced plans to inject up to 1 trillion yuan, $142 billion, into its biggest state banks to boost the struggling economy. Additionally, PBOC cut the reserve requirement ratio for mainland banks by 50 basis points and lowered the 7-day reverse repo rate by 20 basis points to 1.5%. All this has resulted in Bitcoin growth by nearly 3% this week and over 10% this month, writes CoinDesk. Asian stocks are rising as well. For instance, in China, CSI 300 index of large-cap shares rose by 4.5% on Friday, said reports, making it the biggest run since 2008. Similar to the case of the U.S. package, China's stimulus aims to reduce unemployment and stimulate the growth of business. Analysts in the market believe that with such an infusion of money, the price of Bitcoin may indirectly go even higher for the long term, as China's economy reacts to such stimulus. What do you think the elite cabal's next move will be? Let us know in the comments.